What you see here in front of you is the triple bottom line statement of one of the most advanced companies in that area, Holcim. So what they do is they start with something they called retained value. I'm actually quite happy with that. It makes sense to start with your profit. That's definitely a contribution that you give in the areas of profit. What they then end up is employment and taxes and dividends. So what they're saying is actually their impact on society is positive because they're paying wages, they're paying taxes, and they're paying dividends. It really, makes me think, like, what does that actually mean? When you look at impact value, we should maybe quickly go at what impact value is. It started really in the context of social entrepreneurship, and the idea was to tell donors the value that a euro donated gives to society. So the examples here you probably are aware of, it's a vaccination program, for instance. And then it basically says, if we spend a euro on vaccinations, that's how many lives we save. That's how many health costs we avoid. So it's really a multiple of what that donation generates. But when you look at for-profit organizations, when they say they're paying salaries, they're really paying it because they receive something for it. This is not something they do for society. It's something that they have to do to get people to work for them. They have to pay taxes to get a license to operate in the country where they're at. They have to pay dividends because otherwise shareholders will not give them money. So if you look at that, I think it becomes quite questionable why you can count this as a positive impact. Now, there are also some social returns on the triple bottom line statement. They call them social investments. For instance, they look at euros invested in community housing and community health care, and they calculate the value then from avoiding housing costs by the community, basically. They use even a multiple. So here they do the typical social entrepreneurship thing where they say, like, I'm doing something that the community benefits, and I don't have any benefit. Unfortunately, when you go back to the triple bottom line statement and you look at those social investments, they add up to zero. I'm sure it's not zero. The problem here is these are probably millions and not billions. Then when they do something social for the community, it becomes almost irrelevant compared to the rest of the bottom line that they're providing. So a bottom line of 2.4 billion, you cannot do 1 billion in community service. It's just not reasonable, even if you use a multiple like they do. Now, you've heard what I said, and I'd like to know of you now. You're the specialist. You want to bring sustainability into a corporation. You have to work with triple bottom line statements. You have to make sure they make sense and they steer your company to the right direction. There's something that you learn now from yourself, not from me. Salaries and tax is kind of on the border of using that in the triple bottom line statement, but definitely not dividend payments.
I never thought about this in this way before, and it's really interesting. I answered no to all of them because I sort of think if you put them in, then like every single business is going to put them in. So therefore, isn't it meaningless? Because you need to use these statements to be able to compare businesses with each other. And if you say yes, then every business will put in these three categories of things, unless they're operating in an illegal manner. Do businesses attempt to try and do anything around like incrementality or benchmarking along these lines? So to be like, we can put in something to do with wages because we pay top of the market wages, not because we need to, but because we believe in paying a living wage. I'm just making something up. Or we pay more tax than we should. I know they couldn't do that because they have a fiduciary responsibility to pay only the tax that they need to. But there's a concept of like benchmarking or incrementality where you can kind of say like, we are being a really good corporate citizen. We're doing the right thing and we're doing more than other businesses are doing in these areas. Therefore, we can count something. Maybe that makes sense.
So I fully agree with you. My intuition first was they should only list what they pay in excess of what they have to pay. So anything they pay on top of market practices, I would consider a contribution to society. There are aspects of compensation which are probably not part of social, they're part of doing business, and there are aspects of payment that are actually social. We have listed basically two problems. One is they're listing here as a social contribution what they have to do anyway, what they have to compensate anyway. They're not listing what they pay on top. And if they would list that, they would actually have a problem with their shareholders, because they would say, why are you paying too much? I mean, so this is another big issue. There's a fiduciary duty with all the companies that are not B corporations to actually create shareholder value and not be a good citizen. I mean, you can do it as long as it creates long-term shareholder value, but you cannot just decide to pay more for something that you actually could get for less. So this is the first problem. And the second problem is the order of magnitude, or a level problem, a size problem, where your true social engagements get dwarfed, or like they're minuscule compared to the rest of your operation. Now let's come to another problem that you have here. When you look at the negative impacts, of course, in cement, it's CO2. There's no question about it. If you look at the big number here, and if you eliminate the numbers here, that we think are, partly compensation for something, economic returns, so they shouldn't be here, net contribution to society is pretty negative. I mean, this is another problem. If the triple bottom line is honest, and you cannot list what you pay in terms of goods and services you purchase, but you have to list your environmental impact that you're not paying. In this case, they're not paying 8.3 billion that they should pay according to their estimation, then your triple bottom line will always look really bad. One solution that was always on the table when companies evaluate their social performance are ESG ratings. And the ESG ratings have some issues as well. I don't know how much you're aware of the spread of the ratings. You may know that this chart where a rating in one company here, Sustainalytics, and the rating in another one, Refinitiv, it's now called LSEC, is completely different. You can have a 10 here at Sustainalytics. These are all Swiss companies, by the way, and you're all the way down there at Refinitiv. So it's really not the same. There is actually research on that. The most recent one is the most impressive one here. Again, uses Sustainalytics as benchmark and shows all the other ratings compared to the Sustainalytics rankings. And that gives you already a hint that Sustainalytics is really the gold standard. But the distribution of all the other ranks is just devastating. For a 0 at Sustainalytics can have any value more or less from -4 to +4 in the other rankings. So there's really not a lot of commonality. 2/3 of the cohort think the ESG ratings will not converge.
It's a money-making machine.
It's a money-making machine. Yeah, how does it stay a money-making machine? It's a good question. How does it stay one? Can you imagine what happens if they would convert? It would not be a blue ocean anymore. These are companies that all want to make money, and they want to make money with different things. And that's an important thing. Yeah. I listed some of the rating agencies that they had in that research paper. Now, ISS was born with the proxy statements. That's why it's called the proxy advisory. And proxy statements contained compensation information of the executives. So ISS really just worries that things are done properly at the governance level. They don't worry much about the environment and social. Of course, they list that too. But the major focus is good governance. And then we have two ratings that are quite strongly environmental. Sustainalytics, they have more of a social mission. Standard & Poor's doesn't really have one, originally, but they bought companies, Trucost and Robeco Sam, that were very missionary. So we have two ESG ratings that are very missionary. The next two, LSEC and MSCI, they just focus on shareholder value. So they use ESG in its original idea, namely to identify risks for investors so that investors can get better returns. This was the original idea of ESG. It was not doing good. So we have, complete mix of missions between those companies. Then different in method. LSEC is purely numeric, where MSCI, again, has judgments involved to help investors make better returns. When you look at additional ESG rating, there's even one that is focused on SDG benchmarking. That's nothing to do with investor returns. So you see that these ESG rating agencies, they have very different business models. They can never agree. It's impossible to agree. That means you cannot use ESG ratings for your performance statement either. I mean, you can use it as advertising in your sustainability report, but it will not help you credibly communicate to outside parties that you're doing something good. If you don't use a triple bottom line and you don't use an ESG rating, what most companies do, they just describe what they're doing. Here you have Novartis, where access to medicine is one of their goals. People are worried that they're not getting the drugs are too expensive. So access to medicine is the technical term to say Novartis makes sure everybody gets their medicine. And they have a sentence there that describes how they want to increase patient reach, they call it, increase patient reach with therapies. Now, of course, there's one patient reach that is part of their economic business model. It's basically making a profit. But let's assume this is not what they mean by that. It's really that they mean that their drugs can be actually acquired by people who don't have the means to pay as much as in Western nations. Now, I ask you, if you read this report, and that was really the most important sentence there, right? There was a lot of additional text on the Novartis report, and access to medicine is really important. What do you think? How good is this performance? What's your guess?
They say at least 200%, 200%. What does that mean, right? I guess based on what that original number is, it looks like a great statement, but I think the challenge is they're almost incentivized to kind of write these great statements of look at what we did, but it's hard to kind of analyze what it means relative to the impact that, is being driven within the community. It can be almost marketing speak to a certain extent.
I fully agree, Marky. When I look at this statement, and I've seen many statements from companies, some say, we have 30% women. Others says we've reduced the carbon footprint by 50 million tons or whatever, 50,000 tons. I don't know. You can't really say anything. What you need is a benchmark, without a benchmark, you said already, Mark, it's at least they make a comparison to the previous year. That's already something. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a benchmark, if you don't know, have there been 10 patients and now it's 20, by a 200% increase? Or have there been 100,000 patients, now 200,000? And is 100,000 patients actually 50% of all people sick? Or is it 10% of all people sick? And these benchmarks are just not there. And when I researched the Novartis report, the word compare, benchmark, achievement, or target has not been in that report.
It should be something that you can hold people accountable to and ask questions and dig in and drill down into, the nitty gritty per se, right? Just into the super details. And here it's just very, gray.
Very gray, yeah. Very gray. What's missing is benchmarks and then also the metric. If they just focus on the wrong targets, it doesn't help either. I've shown here how it could look, triple bottom line statement. What you have here is your target. Your target is the horizontal blue line. And for each metric that you choose, you have here all the metrics that you want. You show, are you above or below target? And that show here that you can integrate profit as well. So you could do the same with your TSR. And you would say, I'm below target in terms of my total shareholder return. I'm above my target in terms of profit. I'm above my target in terms of sales. And I'm above, for employees. And now here comes in the really interesting part, namely the selection of the categories that are important to you. So here it's different for every company. Most of the companies will actually have something in the area of employees and customers and environment and maybe even governance. But governance, I think, is very difficult to measure. Here you can actually put your emphasis. So Holcim could say, I'm starting with the health of my employees. I'm going to the emissions because that's really important to me. And when I set targets, it doesn't get dwarfed anymore because the return that shareholders make for a Holcim is a lot bigger than whatever health benefits your policy has. Maybe a challenging health policy where you actually may not even use an internal target, but a benchmark to other companies. And then it's very meaningful. If you do that, if this is not the target, if this is the median of the market, it becomes very meaningful. You're actually, for employees, you're better than the average company. And that then allows you to put a lot more emphasis on the sustainability targets for your total company performance. The advantage that things that you were just discussing can be very specific. You can customize it to your operation. You can customize it to the period where you're in. The priorities may change. At one point, one company may have difficulties with their supply chain because they have children in the supply chain. Another one may have problems with accident prevention in the own operation. So you can actually put the topics that you find most material, and here we are actually close to the ESG, to the sustainability reporting, where you have to check for materiality and, even maybe a double materiality. And then you can use that, what is material for you, to present here in a way that every category has the same importance. You can augment the importance of that category. And I think this is a lot more valuable than impact statements. How will the sustainability reports look like in the future? Will they be used on impact valuation? Could be. Will they use some sort of public rating or ranking? Or will they be used on a company internal achievement assessment? Or do you think triple bottom lines are just a fad and will go away? Yeah, it looks like, coming towards the end, You're hoping, quite a few people actually hope for a better solution.